Hey guys, Mr. Matt from Mr. Matt's Arcade here. Today we're going to work on assembling the 1515 Workbee CNC kit. The first step is going to be assembling the extreme solid V-wheeled kits. We're going to be putting the bearings into these wheels, so it'll end up looking like this. So we're going to be working on setting up the extreme solid V-wheel kits. You got 3 pieces. You got your wheels, you got your bearings, and then you have your shims. And you're going to take one wheel, one bearing, snap it into place, flip it over, put in one of the shims, put in another bearing, snap it into place, and take a screwdriver and put it through the middle there just to make sure the shim's aligned properly. And then we're going to repeat that process for 50 of these. Alright, for the next step, we are going to start the Y plate assembly. We're going to attach some Acme nut blocks to the right side Y plate. This here is the right side Y plate. You want to make sure that it's oriented this way and that that indent right there is going to be on the same side that the nut blocks go on. We're going to be using these low profile M5 by 25 millimeter screws, these 3 millimeter aluminum spacers, some more of these precision shims, and then the Acme nut blocks and these nylon lock nuts. And for this one, you're going to need an 8 millimeter wrench and the appropriate size Allen key head for your screwdriver. we're going to be using these two holes and these two holes. And you put your screw through that side. And then we put on one spacer and one shim. Put on one spacer, one shim, one spacer, one shim, and then the Acme nut block is going to be positioned so that shape is on the outside, so that way the nylon lock nut can fit in there. And we're going to tighten them up slightly, but you want to leave them loose. That's what it should look like. And we'll finish tightening that up in another step. All right, the next thing we're going to be working on is the Y wheels and Y inner plate. And for this one, you're going to need your Y plate right that we put these nuts on. You're going to need a Y plate inner. You're going to need 14 of the wheels. You're going to need 7 of the M5 60mm screws. 6 eccentric spacers. 6mm. 7 aluminum spacers, 9mm. 8 aluminum spacers, 6mm. 14 of the precision shims, and 7 of the nylon lock nuts. And we're going to start with these bottom three holes. We're going to put a screw through each one of those. And then the order is going to be the eccentric spacer with this shape facing up. And then next is a precision shim. After that is a wheel. And then one of the 9mm spacers. And then another wheel. And then another shim. Then another eccentric spacer. And again, this shape facing up. And then the Y plate, 3 holes is the bottom. And then on top of that is one of the lock nuts. Then next, move on to the top 4. And the order of this one is a little different. This one, it's going to be the same thing, except we're going to be using regular spacers, 6mm ones, instead of the eccentric ones. So I'm going to do spacer. Shim. Wheel. Nine millimeter spacers. Wheel. Shim. And 6mm spacer. That's the 9mm spacers. On another wheel. Then another shim. Then the other spacer, then through the plate and a lock nut. Turns out it's a bit easier to put the plate on afterwards. Shim and spacer. Shim, spacer, shim, spacer. Then put the plate on, and then put a lock nut on all of them. And we'll tighten them all down very lightly for right now. Now we're going to repeat the process for the other Y plate, the left side Y plate. So let me get that done, and then we'll move on to the next step. So I almost have the second side assembled, but I realized a mistake I made on the first side. So I already fixed the first side. The mistake was these eccentric spacers. The round part is going to go towards whatever plate. So on the bottom, the round part went down, but on this top, the round part is actually going to go up. So that way the round part is facing the plate. We're going to tighten these just a little bit. And then in the next section, we're going to adjust them the proper way. Right now, we should have two identical Y plates with their inner plates and attached with the wheels and spacers in between. Alright, once you have them both assembled and tightened down, on these eccentric spacers, again, on the bottom row, stamped on them is little letters that say 6mm. So you want to adjust those so the words 6mm are facing down. So you do that on all of them. Then you want to run any piece of C-beam through them and check that it doesn't wobble, that it rides smoothly, and that all the bearings are turning. If they're not all turning, or if it's not going smoothly or wobbly, you want to tighten them down more and adjust the eccentric spacers as well to fix that. Looks pretty good right now. I think I'm probably going to have to do further adjustment at some point, but we're going to call it good for right now and move on. Alright, next thing we're going to do is attach the wheels to the Z plate. This one here is the Z plate. Looks very similar to the X plate, so make sure you grab the one that has these specific holes. This side is your front. This side with the little recessed areas is the back. And then also, if you look at it, this side has larger holes on the right side. So we're going to start with the right side. For this one, we are going to use 6 M5 30mm screws, 3 eccentric 6mm spacers, 3 regular 6mm spacers, 6 shims, 6 wheels, 6 nylon nuts, and we're going to start with the right side that has the larger holes. So we're going to be putting the screws in the top, middle, and bottom of the holes. And then the order is your eccentric spacer. And again, the round side goes down towards the plate. Next is a shim. Then your wheel. And then your lock nut. And we're going to go ahead and tighten those down using the same 8mm wrench we've been using and the same Allen head screwdriver. We're going to repeat the same thing for the holes on the left side. Again, top, middle, and bottom. The only difference on this one is we're going to be using a regular spacer. And then the shims again. Then your wheels. And then your lock nuts. We'll go ahead and tighten those all down again. Then again, we're going to adjust the eccentric spacers. So the little lettering that says 6mm is on the right side, facing away from the left side wheels. And that's done to position them as far as possible apart from each other. Then you're going to take a piece of C-beam, go ahead and run it in there. And run it back and forth. Should have a little friction, and you should see all the wheels moving. Looks like they're all moving. Not wobbly or anything like that. So I think that one is all set. Alright, next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our Z plate that we just put the wheels on, and we're going to attach our anti-backlash nut block. So for this one, you're going to need 2 M5 25mm screws, your anti-backlash nut, two 3mm spacers, 2 shims, and 2 nylon lock nuts. And it's going to go in the middle 2 holes. And the nut block is going to go on the same side as the wheels. And then with your nut block, the ends with these shaped here are going to go to the outside. The circle shape is going to go to the inside. And this funky cutout here is going to be facing the left. But in between that, we're going to put on one of the spacers, then a shim, then your nut block, and then your lock nut. Then we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. Then the other part is the grub screw and grub screw nut. That's this little piece here. Mine already came assembled, but you would put this little screw in till it's just barely poking out the other side, and then you would tighten that nut up until it's just touching the nut block. Next, we're going to be putting on the Acme nut blocks to the X plate back, the back X plate. So that's this plate right here. And for this one, you want it so, see this extra little hole at the bottom here? You want it so that's on the left side. So this would be the front of the plate. And for this one, we're going to need 2 Acme nut blocks. 4 M5 25mm screws. 4 3mm aluminum spacers. 4 shims. And 4 lock nuts. We're going to go in these middle holes on each side. Then you're going to put a spacer on. And a shim. And then your nut blocks. And again, the shape like this is going to go to the outside because that's where the lock nut's going to sit in. Then we're just going to loosely tighten these up. There you go. It should look like this when you're all done. Next thing we're going to work on is attaching the X wheels and the X front plate. So here's the X back plate. And this one here is the X front plate. And we want the ones with the insets to be the top side. For this one, we're going to need 7 block nuts. 8 6mm spacers, 14 shims, 14 wheels, 7 9mm spacers, 7 of the M5 by 60mm screws, and 6 of the eccentric spacers. And then you're going to have this plate with these insets be the outside, or face this direction. Screws are going to go in through this way. We'll start with the bottom row. And we'll go ahead and put the top row in place while we're at it. We're using the bottom 3 holes and the top 4. And then for the bottom row, the order is the eccentric spacer, again, round part down towards the plate. And then a shim. Then a wheel. Then a 9mm spacer. Then another wheel. Then a shim. Then your eccentric spacer. And in this case, the round side will be facing up because that's going to go towards the plate. Now we'll repeat the process for the bottom one, but using regular spacers instead. So a regular 6mm shim spacer, then a shim, then a wheel, then a 9mm spacer, then a wheel, then a shim, Then a regular spacer, 6mm. Then we will put the plate on. Then our nuts. And we'll go ahead and tighten them all down. Then we'll adjust the eccentric spacers again, so the wording of 6mm is facing away from the other wheels. In this case, it'll be facing down. Then, like the other ones, we're going to test it with the C-beam and adjust things as necessary to get it so it's gliding through smoothly with a little friction, and the wheels should all be moving. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we are going to mate the X plate, or the X plate, with the Z plate. For that one, we are going to need 8 M5 by 20mm screws and 8 lock nuts. And I'm using a different Allen wrench because there's not as much room for this one. So you're going to have your X plate facing in this direction, your Z plate oriented in this direction, and they're going to go together like that. It's going to go through the only holes available. Go through there, and you're going to put on a nut. So it should look like that. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten those all down. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten those all down. I'm going to make them fairly snug. And then I'm going to use a square to double check that they are all attached nice and squarely. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll be back. All right, next up, as we're attaching the Z aluminum extrusion to the X-carriage assembly with the Z-end motor mount and the Z-end bottom mount. So here's your carriage assembly, here's your extrusion. Here is your motor mount. Motor mount looks like this. And you're going to have the insets facing up. And your bottom mount, it looks like this. And you're going to have the inset facing up. So first, we slide this in here. Then we're going to attach the top plate. For this one, we are going to be using 8 M5 15mm screws. And we can fully tighten these top ones. And we'll flip it over. And we will attach the bottom plate. We'll tighten these fully and then loosen them by one complete turn. There it is. Should look like this when you're all done. There's your top plate attached. Slide up and down. There's your bottom plate. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach the Z stepper motor. So for that, we need 4 M5 50mm screws, 1 shaft coupler, 4 40mm aluminum spacers, and one of your NEMA 23 motors, and the motor is going to go on here with your wire facing towards the back side. First we will put the coupler on here, and we will very loosely tighten it, just enough to hold it in place. This one uses a slightly different size Allen head. There we go. Screws are going to go through the holes on the motor. And then we're going to put spacers on them. And then they are going to screw into the motor mount plate. See if I can get that lined up. There we go. Looks like that's lined up. We'll go ahead and screw that in. Go ahead and snug those down. Then it'll look like this when you're done. Alright guys, next thing we're going to do is install the Z-axis lead screw. And that would be this little guy here. We're going to install it in here and attach it to the motor. You're going to need 2 Z887 bearings and 2 8mm lock collars. So we're going to take this screw, insert it into here, and then you're going to thread it in to the anti-backlash nut. Then onto the top, we're going to slide on a lock collar and then a bearing. Alright, there's the lock collar. There's the bearing. And it tells me to do it differently, but we're going to remove this bottom plate. So we can put on a lock collar. And a bearing on this end. Then we're going to go ahead and attach the shaft coupler to couple the motor to the lead screw. Make it so it's about halfway on each. Go ahead and tighten that up. Alright, we've got the coupler attached now. Then we're going to slide the bearing all the way up until it sits in a little recess. And slide the stop collar up there. And then we will tighten down the stop collar to keep the bearing in place. Go ahead and put the bottom back on. And we can tighten it all the way down this time. We'll go ahead and rotate the shaft. Then we'll slide the bottom bearing all the way down into a little recess. And tighten down the stop collar, keep that in place. Alright, I had to readjust it so I could get that bearing to seat in there properly, and then attach the lock nut. Same thing on the bottom here, make sure that's in there and attached properly. I do believe I need to do some adjustments. It does move, but it doesn't seem to move very easily or smooth, so I think there may be something binding up, so I'll have to take another look at that later. But here's what it should look like when you're all done. Alright guys, next thing we're going to work on is the X-Gantry Assembly. We're going to be using the Y Plate right assembly. That is this one. If you notice the way this is oriented, this is your Y plate right. And then we're going to use a C-beam 1500. This is one of the larger, or one of the largest C-beams. And then a 240 by 1500 V-slot. That's this one. It's one of the largest V-slots. And we're going to be attaching these to the plate. For this, we need 6 M5 by 15 millimeter screws. And we start with the V-slot. We're going to be using these two holes that are right below this opening. We're going to loosely put that on. Next, we're going to attach the C-beam. It's going to go with the C facing that direction. And we're going to be using 4 of the non-threaded holes up here. First one is this one. And then this one here, which is diagonal this way from it. And the one right below it. And then the one diagonal from it over here. And we'll just put those in loosely. So there you go. This hole, this one, and this one. That's for the C-beam, which is facing that direction. And then these two holes for the V-slot. And looks like the V-slot is identical, so you can face it in any direction you want. Hey guys, next thing we're going to do is the X-carriage and T-nuts and the other plate assembly. So for this one we need four T-nuts. And before we slide this on to the beam, we're going to put in the T-nuts. They're going to go so this flat side is facing that way. You're going to slide two into the top rail, two into the bottom rail, then we're going to slide the Z-assembly on here, like that. And then we're going to attach the other side of the plate here to the same exact spots as the other one. It'll be the same holes as before. So we're going to need 6 of the 15mm screws again. Now attaching the C-beam. Alright, for this next part, we're going to be adding the lead screw. So you'll take one of your long lead screws. Then you'll also need two 8mm lock collars and two 688Z bearings. And you're going to put it through the little hole here. And then you're going to thread it through the Acme nut blocks on the assembly here. Once you've threaded through, you can add a bearing onto this end. Add the lock collar first. Then the bearing. And then you can continue threading it through. Keep threading it through until you have enough room to add a lock collar on this side and a bearing on this side. And we'll thread it back so we can get those into the proper position. I'm going to go check the other side, and then we'll tighten them down. And we're actually going to leave them loose for right now, and we will tighten them down in the next step. Alright, for this next one, we're going to be attaching the motor to this side, to this Y plate here. And we're going to need 4 aluminum 40mm spacers, 4 aluminum 6mm spacers, 1 thrust bearing, 1 lock collar, 1 flexible shaft coupler, 4 55mm screws, and 1 NEMA 23 motor. So you want to move it so your lead screw is sticking out this side. And then you're going to put on your thrust bearing. The thrust bearing comes in 3 pieces, 2 silvers and a gold. The silvers have a little ridge, so you're going to put it that way with the ridge facing out. And then the gold piece with little bearings, and then the other one with the ridge facing in. That way the ridges are touching the gold piece in the bearings. And then we're going to put on one of the lock collars. Then the shaft coupler. Then the motor. On these screws, you're going to put the larger spacer first. Then the smaller spacer. And we're going to put it in place. Slide it into the coupler. Line up your screws. And tighten them down. So it should look like that when you're all done. Then we want to tighten everything down. So make sure you push the lead screw out so it's touching the shaft of the motor. And then adjust the coupler so it's halfway on the lead screw and halfway on the motor. And then tighten it down. Then push the lock collar up against the thrust bearing and tighten that down. And make sure the bearing on the inside is seated properly. And then tighten the lock collar onto that one. Alright, we flipped around to the other side of the machine, and now we're going to add a thrust bearing and lock collar on this side. So you need one thrust bearing, one 8mm lock collar, again, silver part goes on with the groove out, and then the gold one, and then the silver part with the groove in. Then you put your lock collar on. Push it up nice and tight against it. Then tighten it down. And then on the inside, you want to adjust the bearing so it's sitting flush in the recess. So it's sitting in the recess. Then you want to slide the lock collar up against it. And then tighten that down. There we go. Alright, next thing we're going to be doing is attaching the black angle corner connectors. It's going to be 2 on each side. So we need 4 of the black angle corner connectors, 4 M5 8mm screws, 4 M5 15mm screws, and 4 nylon lock nuts. So the black angle connectors are going to go right up here on each side. So those T-nuts we put in earlier, you're going to slide them right up against the side of the plate there. Put your corner piece in place. The smaller screw is going to screw into the T-nut. Put that in loosely. And then the longer screw is going to go through a hole in the side plate. And you're going to put one of your nuts on the outside. You're going to repeat the process on the opposite side, same exact way. And then once they're all in place, I'm going to go back and tighten them all down nice and snug. Next thing we're working on is the frame. So for this, we're going to need our two 1500 millimeter C-beams, big ones that look like this, and two 1495 millimeter V-slots that look like this. You're going to arrange them roughly in this manner, with the V-slots at each end running this way. And then our C-beams are going to go through these wheels here. The C side is going to be facing the outside, so that way it can go through the wheels and right over the nut blocks. Then your C-beams are going to rest on top of the V-slots. We're going to go ahead and do the other side in the same way. C facing the outside, sliding through the wheels here. And then resting on the V-slots. You want the ends of the C's and the V's to be flush. So we'll put them roughly flush for now. And then the next step, when we add the end plates, we'll make sure they're perfect. Then the other thing we're doing with this one is we need our two lead screws, and we're going to be putting those in. Those go in the C-beam, threading through the nut blocks on these plates. So we thread the lead screw through the nut blocks. We left them loose originally. I had to tighten up one of them and loosen up the other one in order to get them to thread through properly. Once you get them lined up, it's fairly simple to thread it through. Go ahead and thread that all the way down. There we go. And we'll go ahead and do that on the other side as well. And then we'll move on. Alright guys, next thing we're going to do is we are going to put the bearings and lock collars on the end of the lead screw, and we're also going to be putting on our end plates. So you want your beams positioned like this, so they're resting on each other and flush on both sides. And we'll check and make sure they're square before we tighten anything down. And your end plates look like this. They're going to go here like this. And you want to make sure the recess for your bearing is facing in. You want to make sure you have the appropriate plate so it lines up properly. So for this one, we're going to need the plate. We're going to need one of the bearings, the Z688Z bearing, the 8mm lock collar. Going to need 6 of the T-nuts, 4 M5 12mm screws, and 4 M5 15mm screws. We're going to start with the lock collar on the end of the screw here. And then a bearing. Then we're going to put in our T-nuts. One goes into the top of the V-beam. One goes into the bottom slot on the C-beam. Then our other 4. Oops, make sure you place them so the flat side is out. And 2 in the top of the V. 2 in the bottom of the V. And we use the 15mm screws to screw into the tapped holes on the C-beam. We're going to be using our longer 15mm screws. And one is going to go in this hole right here. Then this hole right here. Then one right below it. Then one right there. We'll go ahead and lightly tighten those. We're going to leave them nice and loose so we can make sure everything's square all around before we move on. Then we're going to use the 4 shorter screws to do these bottom 4 holes into the T-nuts that we put in there. So I'm going to go ahead and get those tightened up and in the proper position, and then we'll show you what's next. Alright, so as you can see, those are all in position. They were all loosely tightened. So I went around and tried to square all the corners up the best I could, using a framing square, just placing it on the inside. And I did that for all the corners and shifted them left and right and moved them around until they're fairly square. So since they're fairly square right now, I'm going to move on and repeat this process for the other 3 corners. Putting on the bearings, putting in the T-nuts, and attaching the end plate. So we'll go ahead and get that done, and then we'll go on to the next step. Alright, for this next step, we're going to be attaching the 2 stepper motors we have left onto the rear plates on each back corner here. So for that one, you're going to need a NEMA 23 stepper motor. You're going to need 4 55mm M5 screws, 4 40mm spacers, 4 6mm spacers, a thrust bearing, lock collar, shaft coupler, and the motor like I showed you. So this process is going to be exactly like the process we did to attach the motor on the other side. So we're going to go ahead. I'll do one, although you can't see much, but I'll explain what I'm doing. And then I'll finish up the other one and come back and show you the next step. So we're going to put the thrust bearing on first. And again, for this one, the flat side is going to face this direction. So the grooved side is on the inside. Then we put on the gold bearing piece. Then this one, flat side is the outside, groove side inside. And then we put on our lock collar. Then our flexible shaft coupler. Then we put on our shaft coupler. That just slides onto the end. And we put our screws through the motor. Then our little spacer. Then our big spacer. Then we screw our motor on. We slide the motor onto the shaft coupler. Once the motor's on and the screws are tightened down, you rotate and slide the lead screw until it touches the motor shaft. And then you position the coupler so it's about halfway on each, and you tighten it down. Then once those are tightened, you push the lock collar up against the thrust bearing nice and tight. And then you tighten that down. Then next thing we do is we move on to the inner bearing. We position that so it sits right in the inset, just like the other ones. And then slide the lock collar up nice and tight against it. And we tighten that down. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite motor, and then we'll move on to the next step. Once you have all your end plates on loosely, you square up the machine, and once it's nice and square, you go through and tighten them all down, and then check square again to make sure they're all set. I used some clamps to lightly clamp things in place while I moved to the other sides, so I could make sure it was nice and square and didn't move on me. Once it's all square and tightened down, you loosen on this end, you loosen these end caps by one full turn. So now we're going to do the inner bearings on the front. So you slide the bearing up and get it into position so it sits in the little recess, just like we've done on all the other ones. And then you slide the lock collar up and tighten it down. We'll repeat this for the other side, and then once those are both tightened and in place, then we can finish tightening these end plates all the way. Alright, next thing we're going to do is finish the ends like we did on this one. So we're going to put on our thrust bearing and then our lock collar. Thrust bearing, flat side touching the plate, grooved side facing out, gold piece on, grooved side in, flat side out. Push the lock collar up nice and tight against it. Tighten it down, and we'll repeat for the other end. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our end caps on the V-slot beams. So for that, you need your end cap, which looks like this. Then you need two 8mm screws. Two M5 8mm screws. Fairly simple. Put it in place there. And screw it right into the V-beam. V-slot beam. And we'll repeat that for the other three V-slot end caps. Alright guys, for this next step, we are going to work on getting everything all set up to install the spoiler board supports. There's two different methods you can do, method 1 and method 2. Method 1, to me, looks like it's more rigid and uses all of your extrusions. Method 2 is less rigid, as far as I can tell. However, it allows you a lot more Z-axis travel. But since I'm planning on using this to cut things that are 1 inch or less in depth, I'm going with method 1. So to start, we are going to double up this front V-slot beam. So you take your other V-slot beam, it's going to end up going here, but before that, we need to add a lot of T-nuts, and then we're also going to be doing an angle bracket, and we're also going to be using some drop-in T-nuts. So for this piece here, we are going to start with putting 2 T-nuts with the flat side up in this top slot. We're going to put 4 T-nuts on the outside slot, 2 in each. And then for the front side that's going to be facing in, we are going to do 6 in each slot. And you're going to place it on top of the other V slot. To attach the beam with these 2 screw holes and T-nuts, we're going to be using 2 12mm M5 screws per side. Get the T-nuts lined up the best we can. and try to screw these end pieces in. Then you'll repeat that on the other side. Then the other thing we'll be doing is installing these corner brackets using the T-nut we put in the top here. Push that right up against this edge. And then we're going to use a drop-in T-nut. And we're also going to be using 2 M5 8mm screws. So for the drop-in T-nut, you slightly thread it on and then put it into place. And then when you tighten it down, it should turn and lock into place. So to use the drop-in T-nut, you're going to lightly thread it on, and you want the smooth, kind of rounded side out, and the side with this little square facing your screw. Then you lightly screw that on, put it into place, tighten it down. It'll turn the T-nut and lock it into place. And then we use the other screw coming down from the top to lock that angle bracket in place. So we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the other corner and on the back one. And then we'll come back and move on to the next step. Alright, for this next part, we're still working on putting in the spoil board supports. So you're going to grab your last 3 V-slot beams, the big wide ones like this. And then we're going to need some 8mm M5 screws. And we're going to need these triple L brackets, as well as some T-nuts. So we are going to be putting in 6 T-nuts per side. And they're going to go in these top 3 spots. And again, the flat side of the T-nut faces out. Then we're going to take our angle bracket, and if you look at the angle bracket, these holes are spaced differently on each side. So you want to take the side that has the holes that are closest to the edge. That is going to go up against your V-slot. We're going to line up our T-nuts. Then we're going to screw in our bracket. Put it on lightly at first so we can adjust it to the proper position. Then we're going to line it up so it's both flush with the top and flush with the end. And we'll double check that it's all flush. Once you're sure that it's all flush and in the proper position, you can tighten it all the way down. And then we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. And then the same thing with 2 more brackets on the opposite end. And we're going to repeat that for the other 2 V-slot beams. So I'm going to take care of that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, now that we have our brackets, 2 brackets on each end of our V-slot beam here, and I did that for the other 2 beams as well. Then the next step is marking and measuring where you want to place them. I wanted them all equally separated apart. So I used tape, put it down in a couple of spots, used a tape measure, went out and drew my lines. So the marks I used are measuring from the right corner bracket, 13 1/8, 26 5/8, and the last one is 40 1/4. I did that on both sides, and we are going to be aligning this edge with that mark on both the front and the back. Once you slide them into place, line it up with the marks that you made. And then for this one, we're going to be using some M5 8mm screws and a couple of drop-in T-nuts. So we're going to be screwing these brackets onto your front and back beams, and they're going to be screwing into the T-nuts that we placed in this beam earlier. Go ahead and get them roughly into position. And then loosely screw them in. We're going to end up wanting it to be flush with this beam here, and you want the edge of that beam to line up with the pencil mark that you need. Once you have it flush and in the right spot, you can go ahead and tighten them down. And we'll double check later that that is flush. And we'll check that it's square. So we did the top 2 holes on the angle brackets. And then for the bottom one, you're going to be using one of the drop-in T-nuts. Slide your drop-in T-nut into position, and then screw it in. And you may find it easier to actually start with the drop-in T-nut rather than doing it last. And that way you can thread it into your bracket slightly first and then put it into place. Once those are tightened in, you'll use your square to double check that everything is square and lining up properly. And then we're going to move on and do the same thing on the back. I'll give you a closer up view of what we're talking about here. So here's a better view of what we're doing. So you want to line that edge right up with your mark. Get your T-nuts in position. And then screw them in. Screw them in lightly at first so you can adjust them and make sure everything's in the proper position. And slide your drop-in T-nut in so the square part's facing out. Slide that into position. And then screw it in. Then we'll repeat for the other side of this bracket. Again, before it's totally tightened down, we'll make sure it's all square and flush. And then we will repeat those steps for the next 2 V-slot beams. Hey guys, now that we have all the spoil board supports in place, that concludes this part of the step-by-step tutorial of the mechanical build section of a 1515 Workbee CNC kit. And again, I purchased this kit from Yuyong Industries from AliExpress. And their customer support has been top notch. They answered all the questions I needed before I purchased it, and they've been very helpful after the fact as well. And all the parts and pieces and everything were all labeled properly. Everything was straight, nothing was bent, no missing pieces, no issues at all. And I am thoroughly impressed with that company and with the kit. So I hope you guys stay tuned. We're going to be doing a part 2 of the tutorial, and we're going to be showing you the electronics install.